All right, here we are in the beautiful home of Beldon Butterfield, famous San Miguelian. For how many years have you been here now?
Well, I haven't been here that many years. I first came here in 1962.
Anyway, yes.
I didn't-
He's so old that 1962 seems like yesterday. But anyway, in a typical rambling fashion, could you tell me how you actually came to San Miguel?
Well, I came to San Miguel because I came to Mexico in 1962 with Time magazine, Time Inc., a division of Time Inc. called Time Life International. Okay? And in those days, when you lived in Mexico City, you took all these weekend drives to what they used to call La Provincia. Everything outside of Mexico City was La Provincia. And one of those trips, you know, there were some mandatory trips. One would be to Tasco, one would be to Cuernavaca, one would be to Morelia, and one would be to San Miguel de Allende. And I came up here in 1962 and stayed at the Sierra Nevada with those four of us. There was a French couple and myself. That's the first time I came. Then, when I was living in Guadalajara, I went to live in Guadalajara in 1975. I had a horse I bought a horse with Harold Black up at the riding school. And so I would come over here, I would drive over here on weekends, and I would stay with Harold. And Harold became one of my closest friends, and that's where I started writing. I started writing at Harold's Escuela Equestre, which, if you remember, a lot of people who now reside here, still reside here, originally came to his school. And so I started coming here, and then eventually I got a house here, rented a house here, and I would come here on weekends, and then I would work in Mexico City during the week. And then I went down from 5 days a week in Mexico City to 4 days a week in Mexico City, and then 3 days a week in Mexico City. And that's, you know, that's where I met Laura Acosta, who lived here.
I remember Laura.
And she had the Fonart store, you know, which was for the Fomento Nacional de Arte Popular. And she had the Fonart store, and she was the buyer, and she's the mother of Dina, who's been very, very successful. So she was living here, so I would come up here, and then, you know, I had girlfriends up here. In fact, I have a painting outside which is of the mother of a very well-known woman in this town. She was well-known because she used to, back in the good old days, because when she got drunk, she would take all her clothes off and go sit in a fountain. Her name was Jean Slingluff, and Sandy Slingluff was her daughter, and she became my girlfriend. So you know, I started coming here, and coming here, and then when I started, you know, getting close to retirement, then I just moved here.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned Harold Black. He was instrumental in doing all the equestrian stuff here back in the...
In my opinion, my humble opinion, they should build a very, very tall statue in this town to Harold Black, because a lot of people, some of them who still live here, all the horsey said, now this has become very horsey country, and it all started with Harold. Listen, this is one of the things that I'm so tired of the pretension of what this town is. This town, okay, was Sodom and Gomorrah. That's what it was in Mexico. That's how it was known in Mexico. That's how it was known in the United States, all during, you know, the hippie period. You know, everybody was on drugs. Everybody was into sex. And all those people, all those retired army officers that came here, you know, to the Instituto, you know, they came here because some very smart people, among them the governor, the ex-governor of Guanajuato, they got this Instituto GI Bill approved. So all these people came down here to take macrame lessons and art lessons and guitar lessons and all the different aspects. But you know, it wasn't an art center. It was it was one big giant Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, a lot of those people, all those young people, still live here, but they're all like me. They're, you know, they're in their late 70s, 80s, and even 90s. But and some of them still live. But that's not the way that San Miguel was. And all this pretension that's come about now, that is not what San Miguel was. The ring. San Miguel was the nightlife. San Miguel was. You remember all that. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. That's what San Miguel was all about.
No, but you're telling them.
Well, I'm telling them.
Yeah.
So, you know, so I see one of the things that Kate put there was, do I think San Miguel has changed from the better? Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
I'm with you there.
Yeah.
I mean, how can anybody? How can any place change for the better? Really?
You know, that's you always live in the. You know, you always live in the. You always think of the places that you really, really enjoy. You know, like I wouldn't go to Puerto Vallarta today, but when I lived in Guadalajara, I used to go to Puerto Vallarta every weekend. You know, and it was the jet set, and it was fun, and it was everything. Today, I wouldn't go to Puerto Vallarta.
You know, they've all moved to Sayulita and.
Yeah, and that's awful. That's awful stuff. I know Sayulita, I know San Pancho's, I know that whole coastline, up and down the bottom. I used to camp on it. You know, and I was married to a Mexican woman from San Miguel, from Mexico City, Maria Teresa Purpon, high society, French name. So,
How many times have you been married, Beldon?
5.
5 times. You're almost up there with Elizabeth Taylor.
Yeah. Well, you know, I was married to Moo, you knew that.
That's when we met.
Yeah, and I was married to my first wife, Carol. She's the mother of my 2 daughters, and we're still very good friends. I just got another email from her yesterday.
American lady?
She's American, yeah.
And lives in...
And she lives in the United States.
You consider yourself a gringo, I suppose.
No, I don't really consider myself a gringo. That's been one of my big problems during my life, because I spent the first 15 years in Argentina.
The very first? You were born there?
I was born there, born in Buenos Aires.
Okay.
And at the age of 15, my parents sent me to the United States as an immigrant. They didn't come. They stayed in Argentina and eventually were thrown out of Argentina during the Perón Evita, and then went to live in Uruguay, which is where they're buried. And my brother and I were sent to the States to private school, and I stayed there. I saw my parents maybe 3 times after I went to the States, and all I have to tell you is in my prep school yearbook, my 2 nicknames were Spick, and my other nickname was the Mooch, because you know, Thanksgiving would come around and Christmas vacations would come around, and there I was, you know. And so I had to mooch off people. You know, and the same thing happened, you know. And I went to college, and the same thing, you know. Well, I worked, but you know, it's
the Spick.
You know, but I only spent 14 years. Of all my 81 years, I only spent 14 years in the United States. I spent between 1950 and 1962, which is when I was sent to Mexico. At the time, I had magazines all up and down the west coast of Mexico. I had a magazine in Tijuana, I had a magazine in Mazatlan, I had a magazine in Puerto Vallarta, I had a magazine in Manzanillo, I had a magazine in Los Cabos.
Magazines of?
For tourists. They were called About.
Okay.
So it would be about Puerto Vallarta.
Okay.
And the deal I made, I copied this from a magazine in the United States called Where. And I copied basically the way it worked is, you went to a hotel and you said, look, I got a standard cover, but I put a photograph of your hotel, or whatever part of your hotel you want on the cover, and your logo, but in return you got to put this magazine in all the rooms. And so there was a magazine I tried to stay away of where to go. It was more how to survive.
So you're still friends with all your ex-wives. That's amazing.
Yeah, we're good friends. You know, we all parted. We all parted for. Listen, here I'm living a very, very disciplined life in the United States. I graduated from college. My graduation present was my first daughter. You know, and you go to work and you work your ass off in a very disciplined environment. That's just the way it was, you know. I mean, you know, I'm working in New York City. I go to work for time. You know, I got an office and I'm sharing it with a guy from Japan and a guy from Cuba and a guy from India, from Bombay, because it was no longer Bombay. All of us being trained to go to different places. I'm being trained to go to Mexico. And, you know, I get to Mexico, I walk in, and I got a pine-paneled office, I got a secretary sitting outside, and I got a manager, you know, I can remember his name, it's Hector del Prado, and Hector, he calls me in, and he said, now here are the rules. I said, I'm going to tell you the rules. The rules are this. If anybody calls you from New York, you tell them and asks you how you're doing. You see, Mexico City in 1962 was considered a hardship post. So we got all sorts of privileges. You got you wouldn't send your children to a public school, so you got the education paid for in a private school. So my kids went to the Lycée Français. You didn't, you know, your housing, well, you got a certain allowance for your housing because everybody knew, you know, robberies and so on and so forth, and you get an extra 2 weeks vacation, so you could go back to the United States and get reacquainted with your country. Okay, and so, and you know, and the job was the easiest thing in the world because we just had Mexicans who did all the, you know, Mexicans just did all the work. I mean, you train these guys, you know, you train these guys, and they're very good. And so, you know, work day usually ended around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And you came back to the office just to check and make sure, you know, everything was okay.
After lunch.
And after a long lunch. And then you went, you know, then the nightlife took over. Well, Mexicans had this very well under control. For a guy like me, I was totally out of control. Totally. I mean, this was like I just stepped into paradise. You know.
Imagine getting paid to do this.
Not only getting paid, but my boss in New York City, this guy by the name of Frank White, he was very famous. He was a very famous journalist because he'd been the chief correspondent in Paris, and he knew Ernest Hemingway, and he knew all the people, you know. And he wrote me one day a letter, and it said, "Dear Beldon, I am alarmed of the little that you are spending on your expense account. It shows me that you're not getting out and around and meeting the right people. So please, start doing that. That's one of the most important jobs you have is, you know, the image of Time Life and to meet and consort with the right people." And I said, "Oh, I can do that." But I was, you know, I was totally out of control, and so inevitably, what ended up was in a divorce.
Yeah. Not getting fired.
No, Carol went back to Pennsylvania, took the 2 kids with her. I stayed on, and then New York caught on that something smelled fishy in Mexico. That these guys, so they sent one of these accountant types down, and they gave me 2 choices. They said, you can go back to New York and see what they can do with you, or you can resign. To Hector Leprado, who was the general manager, they sent him to the Philippines. Because there were only 3 of us on you know, a New York salary. And so that's how I stayed in Mexico.